The building has already been picked clean, or so the person walking out believes. They took the canned goods from the kitchen, the blankets from the upstairs closet, a flashlight with dead batteries, and a box of matches that will last them 4 days. They walked past the water heater. They walked past the copper. They ignored the attic insulation, left the medicine cabinet half-examined, and never once looked at the fuse box. In an extended grid-down scenario, what they left behind was worth more than everything they carried out. Not slightly more, categorically more. The problem is not effort, it is sequence and system. Most people enter a structure with a scavenger's eye and they see objects. The 7 categories in this breakdown will train a different kind of eye entirely. One that sees a building as a layered resource system and knows exactly which layer to strip first and why the order is not optional. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, FEMA documented that displaced residents who remained in the Gulf Coast without resupply began sourcing materials from abandoned structures within the first 72 hours. Most retrieved consumables. The structures themselves, containing recoverable water, wiring, plumbing components, thermal materials, and chemical stores, were largely ignored beyond the obvious. In post-disaster material recovery, the difference between someone who makes it to month 2 and someone who does not is rarely access. It is extraction literacy. This breakdown addresses that gap directly, in sequence, starting with the one thing almost no one takes. The 40-gallon water heater in the utility room of an abandoned house contains more immediately drinkable water than most people carry into a 2-week survival scenario. And almost no one takes it. Marcus Teller, a civil engineer who spent 3 weeks displaced after a major flood event, later described walking past functioning water heaters in 4 separate structures before someone told him what he was looking at. Standard residential water heaters hold between 30 and 80 gallons. That water sits in an insulated, sealed tank largely protected from the contamination that hits surface sources within hours of a grid failure. The tank exists because modern plumbing requires a pressurized, heated buffer reservoir to maintain. The mechanism is mundane. The value in an emergency is not. A single tank, drained properly, supplies one person with drinking water for over a month at conservative rationing. Find the cold water inlet line at the top of the tank. Attach a hose to the drain valve at the base. Open a hot water tap anywhere in the structure to break the vacuum. Let gravity work. Also strip the supply lines, size. Braided stainless connectors are reusable, pressure-rated, and worth carrying. Do not leave a water heater behind. Full stop. Copper does not expire. That is the foundational fact that makes it the second priority in any stripped structure. In a barter economy, which historically emerges within 4 to 6 weeks of a sustained infrastructure collapse, as documented after the Sarajevo siege of the early 1990s, refined metal becomes transactional currency before paper does. Copper wiring runs through every wall cavity of any residential structure built after 1960. Make it permanently tradable and functionally reusable for electrical repair, plumbing, and fabrication. A single-family home contains between 100 and 400 pounds of copper depending on age and size. At any functional trading post within a disrupted region, that material has concrete exchange value. Use a voltage tester before touching any wiring. Assume live current until confirmed otherwise. Cut pipe at joints, not mid-run, to preserve fitting length. Coil wiring in tight loops and bundle by gauge. Copper rewards patience during extraction. The attic is the most thermally critical space in any structure, and almost no one stripping a building ever looks up. Fiberglass bat insulation, rigid foam board, and blown cellulose are all recoverable, either reusable, and directly applicable to any improvised shelter where temperature regulation is a survival variable. During the brutal winter of 1944-45, Allied soldiers sheltering in damaged European structures used torn insulation materials to line sleeping positions and reduce convective heat loss. A documented practice in field survival accounts from that period, Insulation exists because building codes mandate thermal resistance values measured in R ratings. A standard attic contains R38 or higher, which represents significant engineered heat retention. In a shelter lacking climate control, that material reduces overnight heat loss in a sleeping environment by a measurable margin, enough to shift survival calculus in temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Pull bats in full sections, not torn pieces. Keep facing intact when possible. Double layer any sleeping platform before adding blankets. Do not compress fiberglass. Its resistance comes from trapped air, and compression destroys that value. Warmth is arithmetic. The medicine cabinet is not the prize. The cabinet under the sink is. Most people scanning a bathroom in a stripped structure take the visible medications, ignore expiration dates, and leave. What they leave behind is a secondary pharmaceutical and sanitation tier that outlasts most consumables in the structure. Isopropyl alcohol at 70% concentration remains effective as a surface antiseptic for years beyond its printed date, as the active compound does not meaningfully degrade in sealed containers. Bleach, sodium hypochlorite, water purifies at 8 drops per gallon of clear water and remains potent for 6 to 12 months from manufacture. Pool shock, where present in garages or utility spaces, it contains calcium hypochlorite at 65% concentration and purifies water at a ratio of 1/8 teaspoon per gallon. A single 1-pound bag treats roughly 10,000 gallons. These compounds exist in residential structures because of routine household sanitation needs. Their survival utility dwarfs that utility by orders of magnitude. Catalog every chemical container before touching it. Check concentration percentages, not brand names. Store oxidizers separately from organics during transport. Read the label like a field manual because in this context it is. Every nail, screw, bolt, hinge, bracket, and anchor pulled from an abandoned structure is a unit of infrastructure that took industrial manufacturing to produce and cannot be improvised in the field. Rodrigo Famosa, a contractor who volunteered in post-earthquake reconstruction in a rural zone, he documented that hardware scarcity, not material scarcity, was the limiting factor in shelter rebuilding within the first 60 days. Lumber was available. Fasteners were not. The mechanism is simple. Mechanical fasteners are consumed invisibly during construction and are never stockpiled at the residential level. They exist because structural assemblies require rated connection points. They outlast every consumable in any structure and remain fully functional regardless of age. A 5-gallon bucket of mixed fasteners recovered from a single residential structure represents weeks of construction capacity. Pull hinge screws, strip outlet boxes, remove cabinet hardware, collect everything into sorted containers by type and length. Small parts decide large outcomes. 30 gallons of heating oil sat in the basement of a vacant colonial on a rural road for 11 months before Denise Caraway found it. She almost didn't check the tank. She had assumed, without looking, that it would be empty, a mistake that has a specific name in field triage, assumption of depletion. Heating oil, propane in exterior tanks, and seasoned firewood stored in outbuildings represent the highest density portable energy sources available in a residential strip. A single gallon of heating oil contains approximately 138,000 British thermal units of thermal energy, equivalent to burning 40 pounds of dry hardwood. These fuels exist because modern residential heating systems require consistent, controllable combustion energy. They do not evaporate on their own. They do not expire quickly. Heating oil remains combustible for 18 to 24 months without treatment. Check every basement, every exterior tank pad, every outbuilding before leaving a property. Bring containers rated for fuel storage, not repurposed water jugs. Siphon conservatively and seal immediately. The tank you assume is empty has cost more than one person a winter. And everything else on this list is something inside the building. This is the building. Dimensional lumber, the 2x4s, 2x6s, and 4x4s posts in wall framing and roof structure, is a manufactured graded structural material that requires a sawmill to produce and months to season from raw timber. In any scenario where supply chains are disrupted for more than 90 days, dimensional lumber becomes one of the most scarce and valuable construction materials in a region. I strip it last because stripping it first compromises the structure that shelters your other extraction work. Identify non-load-bearing interior partition walls first. These are the safest to disassemble without structural consequence. Remove drywall to expose studs before cutting. Pull nails cleanly to preserve board length. A standard 3-bedroom home contains enough framing lumber to build 2 small outbuildings, 1 reinforced storage structure, or substantial fencing for a productive garden perimeter. The wood exists because engineered shelter requires it. In its second life, it builds the next shelter. Take the walls down only after everything else has been taken out. 6 categories have a single thing in common. They are invisible to the person who enters a structure looking for what they recognize. Water heaters, copper, insulation, chemicals, hardware, fuel. None of these appear on the mental checklist of someone who learned to prep from a list of gear to buy rather than a framework for reading what already exists. That is the real gap this breakdown is addressing, not knowledge of specific items. The deeper question is this: if every structure you walk past contains this much usable material, and the only thing preventing extraction is the failure to see it, then how much of the resource problem in a long-duration scenario is actually a perception problem? The answer shapes every entry into every structure from this point forward, which means the last item on this list is not lumber. The last item is the habit of looking at a building as a system before you take a single step inside. The water heater gives you clean water for a month from a source most people walk past. When copper from a single home represents months of barter currency in a post-supply chain economy. Insulation pulled intact and reapplied in a sleeping position shifts survivability in sub-40-degree temperatures. Household chemicals, bleach, isopropyl, pool shock, form a sanitation and water treatment tier that commercial prep kits rarely match in density or cost. Mechanical fasteners are the limiting factor in reconstruction, not materials, and a 5-gallon bucket changes that equation. Our fuel stores and tanks and outbuildings contain BTU value that no portable kit replicates at equivalent weight, and dimensional lumber, stripped last and stripped carefully, is the raw material for every shelter improvement that follows. The person who runs this protocol in month 1 walks into month 3 with a water buffer, a trade inventory, a warmer sleeping environment, a functional sanitation system, hardware for repair and building, a fuel supply, and structural material. The person who grabbed the blankets and canned goods runs out of both by week 3. That is not a motivational contrast, it is a material accounting difference, and it is consistent across every documented long-duration displacement scenario on record. Walk every structure before you touch anything. Draw the layout from memory before you leave. Strip in sequence. Water, metal, thermal, chemical, hardware, fuel, structure. Document what you take and what you leave. Never assume a tank is empty. The buildings were already full. You just didn't know what you were looking at.